What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube / the internet? It's your boy Jack Slack, here with episode 71 of the Fights Gone By podcast, back on more of a normal schedule, and we're going to be doing the first edition of Slacky's star rating. This is something that a few listeners asked for. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the ratings of the fights as I saw them. These will be my first viewing ratings. And basically I've tried to go on how interesting the fight was. So it could be a barn burner and be interesting, or it could be a good technical performance and be interesting. It could be a back and forth sort of fight, or it could be a one-way performance rather than a two-person dance. So, it's always going to be difficult because when you're talking about pro wrestling matches, which is obviously how this got famous, Dave Meltzer and his star ratings, which I think he's been doing since the 80s in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, which is a rag sheet, brother. So I've always wanted to do that. No, it's great publication, but the problem is that he can set forward his criteria for a good match, and typically involves some psychology. There's the performance and also the storyline, the narrative, and things like that. Whereas there are so many things that make a fight entertaining. It could be, as I said, a back and forth thing or a one-way ass kicking. So really what I've done is I've just given star ratings based on how much I thought or how much I really enjoyed it, either as a fight or as a technical performance. So you're going to get things which are 4-star technical performance. You're going to get things that are 4-star slobber knocker, things like that. The lower the rating, obviously, the less interested you want to be in it. And really, the reason we're doing this is because there's a shit ton of fights on every week. And, doing it this way allows me a spoiler-free way of telling you which ones you probably want to catch up on. And then later in the podcast, what we'll do is we'll do star ratings, then we'll do some news, and then we'll jump into the fight recaps, and we'll talk about why they got the ratings. So if you're angry about a rating, you can see through the news and then get to my rating later in the episode. Obviously, all subjective, and I know that I've gone back to fights years later and been like, God, this was much better than I remember. In fact, I'm almost always tweeting, wow, X versus X is a much better fight than I recall. But this is just, at the time, having seen the event, these stood out to me. These ones probably not worth catching up on. So from the top, Milstead versus Johnson, 1 star. Terrible place to start my star rating system. Caro versus Stamen, I gave that 3 stars. Pyle versus Otto, I gave 2 stars. Dolloway versus Lombard, 2 stars. Dodson versus Munoz, 2 stars. Hernandez versus Dariush, 4 stars. Dern versus Yoda, 2.75. We are doing point. I just didn't get around to doing it until then, or rather, one never really deserved it until then. Zingano versus Vieira, 3.5 stars. Struve versus Arlovsky, 1 star. Dog shit. Avoid that. O'Malley versus Sukman whatever his name is, 4 stars. Ortega versus Edgar, 4 stars. Cyborg versus Kunitskaya, 2.75 stars. There you go. Get angry. Get ready for that. And we'll do some news. Right, Bellator is continuing to become the mother of all shit shows. Chuck Liddell is allegedly closing in on a multi-million-dollar deal with Bellator. As I said on Twitter, at least some fights will get finished this way, because there's not been a good Legends fight in Bellator. Everyone keeps tuning in, expecting something, and I don't know why, because they always turn out shit. And then they just announced that Roy Nelson versus Crocop 2 is their big fight for their UK event. Crocop teased it the day before as if it was going to be the Fedor fight, but obviously they've got Fedor in this tournament now. Someone said put him in as an alternate, Crocop that is, and hopefully they meet in the final. It's just Fedor's not won anything in a while. He's going to get knocked out almost definitely. So that was that. The really only interesting piece of news is that MVP's fighting David Rickles, who I believe is an all-right fighter. I remember him from... Oh no, I remember him losing to Melvin Gillard. That's basically what he's famous for, and getting knocked out by Michael Chandler. Anyway, I'm Patrick Frere. Okay, well, it's still a step up above what most of MVP's opponents are. What other interesting news? Uriah Hall versus Borrachinha was announced, which is a cracking fight. Awful lot of people being like, R.I.P. Hall. Some people were saying that maybe it's punishment for missing weight that time and passing out and drawing more attention to just how horrible the weight cutting in MMA is and continues to be. But, you know, Uriah Hall, as always with Uriah Hall, it's whatever Uriah Hall turns up. At least Borrachinha is a good, aggressive guy. A lot of what Hall really struggles with is sort of sitting back, not doing enough, doing the occasional spin, and then dropping around because he spins and falls over or spins and gives his back. If you watch him versus Bobby Whittaker doesn't do anything amazing in that fight. Bobby Whittaker just keeps taking these openings that Uriah Hall keeps opening up. So he spins and falls over, Whittaker takes top position and just stays there for the round. He spins for a back elbow and misses. Whittaker just sticks to his back for the back clinch and keeps, almost throwing him and then kneeing him some more. And that's most of the round. You know, he's a guy who fights in a way that's very counterintuitive to winning a decision. Meanwhile, Borrachinha, obviously, the terror of USADA. He's fucking enormous. But, entertaining fighter. Watched him beat up the ghost of Johnny Hendricks most recently, which isn't really a fight that you want to, get on the hype train off of. But, yeah, I'm excited for that. Overeem versus Blades is being alleged by a Dutch site for UFC 225. Blades is coming off that decent win over Mark Hunt. Overeem's coming off being Pez dispensed by Francis Ngannou. Decent enough fight. It seems like they want to move Blades along slowly still. So, fair enough. Go for it. If it's true, of course. It's a Dutch site alleging it. So Overeem might have just told the Dutch site and then the Dutch site ran with it. Sources close to Alistair Overeem, i.e. him. Ozdemir versus Teixeira is booked for UFC 224. That's two of the very few good light heavyweights, and it's still not very exciting. But I've just come to terms with the fact that Alexander Gustafsson is just not there. He's not really part of the light heavyweight rankings. So they can't really do that much else, But Teixeira's never fought Daniel Cormier, so you'd think that they'd be trying to save that. Even though, no one would be interested in it. But anyway, other news unrelated to the UFC. Edmonton in Canada lifted its year-long ban on combat sports about 2 months after instituting it. That was when, you remember Tim Hague, UFC veteran, took a boxing match up there, sadly passed away after it. The commission, the governing body of that region, decided that they were going to stop all combat sports until this could be looked into. And then they realised, actually we make okay money from combat sports. So they went back to work. Bit sad, but, you're never really going to be able to run a combat sports ban if you make any degree of, any small amount of money off combat sports in, a state commission or whatever. The Tim Hague thing, very weird to look into anyway. He'd been knocked out something like 5 times in the last 2 years. I'm just saying that, don't remember the actual statistics, but I do remember being like, that probably should have flagged, a degree of concern with someone at some point. But then, Alistair Overeem keeps getting booked to fight. Andrei Arlovski keeps getting booked to fight, and they've been knocked out like 10 times, out cold each. Very sad. Oh, and we'll get on to Arlovski later, don't worry. Talis Laters versus Jack Hermansson for UFC 224. Gregor Gillespie versus Vink Pachel at Fight Night Utica. There's some good fights being put together. Good fun stuff, which, I'm trying to pay more attention to in these podcasts now. Because it's too easy to get drawled into just the big names. But anyway, that's our news for the week. Let's talk about those fights. I think we'll go bottom to top. Yeah, that's the way to do it. Milstead versus Johnson was a slog. Milstead, his hands were fast enough for a guy who used to be a heavyweight and is now a light heavyweight, but he was just sort of flurrying. And, what I always say between the difference between flurries and combinations generally, or flurries and setups and things like that, is that when you're flurrying, you're just throwing your hands at, one spot. Whereas a good boxer is going to throw punches to where his opponent is, or is moving to, or where he thinks he's going to be moving to. Every time the guy came in, Milstead just threw 4 punches. And then another good example is Mike Swick, that one where he knocked the dude out throwing a 4-punch flurry right at the start. And everyone was like, oh my god, he's got quick hands. it was just he threw the punches, didn't really matter where the opponent was. That's what I mean by a flurry normally. The thing about this was that I was watching it and I was trying to run through these criteria that I put down, like, a back and forth fight, if there's changes in dynamic, if they're continuing to bring new things against each other, one guy's doing well this way, so the other guy changes up the dynamic of the fight, and those things, when I put them down on paper, I was like, those are interesting. That's the sort of thing that would entertain me. And then this fight, they were going back and forth. Milstead was trying to win on the feet. Johnson was running him to the fence and trying to take him down. And it was really, really boring. Like, Johnson, his shots were just head down and run. It was like Brock Lesnar style, except Brock Lesnar was a monster truck, and this dude was just a dude. And then Milstead wasn't really connecting enough, and then they got this, was it a split decision at the end? But the decision went, and I just remember thinking, like, oh, that could have gone to either of you. I mean, I'd have happily called it a no contest for not much happening. But anyway, the fight after that, Caraway versus Stamen. Stamen. Isn't that part of a flower? Someone can feel free to use that in their trash talk next time they're fighting him. But I thought this was this was another one that sort of tested my intention with this system, because the first round I thought was terrific. Brian Caraway came out, struggled to take Stamen down along the fence. Stamen looked really good. He was using the, he was cross-facing all the time, and then he used the quarter Nelson and almost took Caraway's head off with an elbow on the break. Love that. And Caraway finally sort of left it alone and went to his boxing, which, we really don't talk about much because he's known so much as a grappler. But he was using a flicker jab from low down below his opponent's, through the blind angle, as Izzy Adesanya did the other week. And it was really interesting because he threw it in like 2 or 3 times and it worked. The moment that Stamen started covering up and trying to fire back, the takedown came, and it came in effortlessly. And that was, that's all that GSP did. It was, I'm going to jab you, do something about it, or I'm just going to keep jabbing you. And then the moment that they do something about it, he's already in on their hips. So that was absolutely beautiful. And then the moments that he was on the ground on top, there was a chasm of skill difference between the two of them, and it just shows the massive difference between wrestling, as in, on the cage and on the feet, and grappling on the ground. Like, completely different areas, because Caraway was just brilliant. He used a lovely foot pummel, so he was trying some like BJ Penn style or Paul Schreiner or someone like that style passing from like half butterfly guard, and he was also doing another BJ Penn thing, which is where you when you're in half guard, you reach and grab the opponent's toes, like the end of their foot, and pull it back like you're trying to do some kind of weird toe hold. I mean, Gomi submitted a guy in what's it called, combat wrestling, the Kikuchi stuff. He submitted a guy by pulling from side control. He pulled the guy's toes up to his head. And I think they called it like a serpent hold or something. And it shouldn't work on anyone good, but pulling the toes like that can make dudes move. And if you watch BJ Day Scout's study on BJ Penn, he liked to play with that foot a lot, so the opponent would either put the foot to the ground and shrimp and he'd step over it, or put the foot inside for the butterfly hook and then he'd grapevine the other leg and step over it. So he was trying some passing like that. He got pushed back to full butterfly guard, and he had the underhook on one side, and then he did that. Basically what Damian Maia does, he jumped up and pummeled his leg into the middle and went straight into the knee cut. That foot pummeling stuff, loads of guys are huge on it now. There's Ryan Hall did a big bit in his brilliant DVD series on that. If you watch Gordon Ryan's passing is really underrated. But Gordon Ryan, he'll start with splitting the guard, one foot in the middle, keep the opponent on their back, and then what he'll do is he'll either pummel the left foot inside, he's got his right foot in, left foot out, and he'll pummel the left foot inside and start attacking the leg, or he'll lean forward onto his opponent, pummel his right foot out so that it's in what like Rafa Mendes calls the shin trap position, and then he'll try and do like an X pass from there. That foot pummeling stuff, really cool when you see it done at a high level. Second round was a little bit slower. Caraway couldn't get the takedown. His jab wasn't working as well, and Stamen was countering well off it. There was a really nice couple of really nice right hands on the counter. It sort of slowed down second round. Third round got a bit slow too, and then there was that incredible final flurry. And I really like that because, Caraway, aside from that jab, which looked quite nice through the first round, he doesn't have a lot on the feet, but he was still going forward and making stuff happen, and he got the exchange working, and then Stamen finally shot on him, and he turned him over with a guillotine, and, it was, had it happened, 20 seconds earlier, he'd have had time to work and really be effective. I'll tell you what I really did like in this fight, though, because there were long periods where Caraway would shoot in, put his head on the guy's chest and be trying to get down on his hips, and Stamen would be landing the knees. That's with that position. We talk constantly about the infighting along the fence, which is coming into vogue very, very slowly, but is proving the difference in the fights that it appears in. Head underneath the opponent's, hips back so that you can hit, and he is pushed up straight so that he can't hit with any power. That's also a good position to knee from if you get your head underneath the opponent, stand them upright, throw your hips back, start kneeing. But it was Stamen landing the good knees on Caraway when Caraway had his hips thrown back. Very interesting. You don't see a lot of guys kneeing well with their back to the fence. Occasionally you see Demetrius Johnson do it, but he'll do it and then he'll immediately angle off and start working on the double collar tie or something like that. But I thought that was a fun fight. The beautiful work in the first round by Caraway. Slowed down in the second and third. There were some nice counters from Stamen, and then that last flurry between the two of them, where they were both looking a little bit sloppy on the feet. Caraway's throwing these uppercuts from way behind him, but that last flurry really pushed it into 3-star territory for me. I was like, do I tell people to watch this fight? And then I thought, actually, yeah, no, it had enough good moments. There were good technical moments, and there was also good back and forth fight moments that you can sort of allow that drop in pace in the middle. I would say 4-star and above is must watch, in my opinion. When I give something 4 stars, I'm saying go and watch that fight. If you're only gonna watch a few fights from an event, do 4-star and above. But 3-star, I would say, is a good fight. If you're really hankering for some fights, watch that fight. 2-star is better than nothing. And then 1-star is I might actually prefer watching the blank screen than this fight. Pyle versus Otto gave this 2 stars, even though there was a big knockout. Mike Pyle doesn't look right without the mullet, does he? He looks a bit weird. In fact, he looks a lot more handsome, and you're no, I preferred it when you were handicapping yourself by having the mullet. But this one was sort of a tedious kickboxing match that really, a lot of the stuff just was from way out of range. Finally, Otto lands a good low kick and then steps in with a right hand down the pipe, knocks Pyle down. Pyle seemed to recover on the ground, but then wasn't really entirely with it. He could have got away with it if Otto hadn't then realised that he could probably keep going. There was a flurry, Pyle recovered, Otto stepped over to half guard, flurried again, and that's how he got the stoppage. Obviously, Mike Pyle getting a bit long in the tooth in this game. But, I think he's always going to be a crafty enough vet that he's troublesome for most people. And, he just got caught with the right hand after a nice, I think it was a low kick. It wasn't, I wouldn't write home about the fight, and the knockout wasn't amazing enough that I would stop everything I'm doing and watch it. Dollaway versus Lombard. I thought CB Dollaway did well in this fight, using his height and reach, or range rather. It has the long old legs, so he started attacking the open side with kicks. When he wasn't attacking the open side, he did a really nice job with his jab. He's the southpaw in this equation. Oh, no, sorry, I apologise. Lombard's the southpaw in this equation. So CB Dollaway's attacking the open side with the right kick. DC was calling for the right high kick. I thought the commentary booth were really good. I've always liked Anik, Rogan, and DC as a grouping. I was going to say pairing, but there's 3 of them. But I think DC is so knowledgeable as a fighter for a start, but also he's willing to play with Rogan. And then Anik was doing wonderful. He was doing hilarious stuff, like bringing up that Adelaide Bird was in it was judging for that fight, and just leaving it out there. He's sneaky, that John Anik. But that was hilarious, and they had a few really good moments during the fights, and they were also talking about the fights, and it was entertaining and compelling. The only one I ever complain about is like Todd Grisham, because he's awful. And Dominic Cruz, he brings so much knowledge, but he has this massive chip on his shoulder, and he just seems to, every time he talks, he says a line, he just has to make clear at the end of the line that he hates everyone he's in the booth with. It's really weird. But I think this is like the money team now, Anik, Rogan, and DC. I really miss Brian Stanley. He was terrific. Gooden and Hardy are great, but they seem to only be put on very occasionally. Fitzgerald and Felder are fantastic too. And Jimmy Smith came in and on the first night stole the show. So they got a heap of talented guys in the booth now. The only problem is that like when you've got so many, it can be very hard for people to get attached to any of them. Like because we had the Rogan and Goldberg thing for so long. Anyway, sorry, we're talking about Dollaway versus Lombard. This is an interesting one because firstly I forgot to say Stevie Dollaway's jab looked slick during this fight. Because Lombard does so much of that window stuff with the hands up high parrying. If you've seen him on the pads, people were asking me why I don't like him. Watch him on the pads with his pad man, shouting at the pad man. All he ever does is stand still and then call his own shots and then slap the guy's hands when he throws back. Dude's got very little head movement, very little footwork. And I think it's because he's so stubborn and unpleasant that he hasn't learned it. But I on his side almost in this one because I thought it was very close, the calling of time. But then it gets a bit more complicated because I was thinking, is this more egregious than the Aldo one? But then I went back and watched the Aldo one, and the fans are going ballistic at the time, whereas nobody gave a shit about this fight. So I think Lombard probably did hear it, and I think it was late. And whenever this happens and there is a DQ, we go, well, a DQ's a bit harsh. But clearly he had really hurt Dollaway, and I would like to see more calls made with stern decisions. They were bringing in soft warning and hard warning for this event. I don't know what's going on there. That's a Herb Deanism. But it's good that they actually did something about it in the aftermath and didn't just call it a no contest. 2 stars, wouldn't bother catching up on it. Even the controversy wasn't that interesting. Dodson versus Munoz. Dodson was doing the same footwork he'd been doing against John Lineker. I thought he was more interesting against Lineker because he went to both sides. This one he was just going to the same side over and over again. A lot of that is because John Lineker has a left hook. Pedro Munoz did not. I called Munoz the bantamweight for people who say that bantamweight fights too fast, because he was slow as molasses in this fight. He landed a couple of good punches, but it took so long for them to land. Not in terms of each punch, but he was swinging at air all fight. Kept kicking, kept getting the kick caught. John Dodson keeps calling his own groin shots, even when it's like a brushing thing, and the referee just jumps in and does whatever he says. It got really tedious, to be honest, and it was just the same outside angle over and over again. Slap the hand, double left straight, keep pivoting around. And Dodson wasn't connecting enough to do anything with it, or showing enough variety, or even using his right hand at all. And Munoz was too slow to catch him. It was just really boring. So 2 stars. Hernandez versus Dariush. I thought this was a brilliant fight. Hernandez obviously came out of nowhere. Lots of people saying, is this guy in the USADA testing pool? If you were interested, no, he's not been tested at all by USADA. 0 tests on their database. Does look pretty ripped, but we'll see in the coming months because he's just done this. But if you were in any doubt as to how good lightweight is, this guy, the number 2 lightweight in Texas we joked about last time, or it might have been South Texas, Charles Cheeks III, and who I now want to check out because clearly Hernandez was ranked below him and did this. But, Dariush took this fight on short notice 2 weeks ago. Bobby Green pulled out. And it just shows that if you're anywhere close to getting a UFC call-up, you are a decent fighter, in the lightweight division at least. It's not, what's her name? Kuchera. Coming up against Valentina Shevchenko. I say coming up, being scouted out specifically to lose to Valentina Shevchenko. Someone was on Reddit trying to make this seem like, well, now it seems more understandable that they brought Kuchera in. And as I know, if you watched any of her fights, you knew that she wasn't a good fighter. If you'd watched any of Hernandez's fights, you just knew that he was a fairly decent fighter who hadn't fought anyone top level yet. There's a degree, to an extent, you can't tell that much about how good someone is without seeing them fight very good people, but you can tell if someone's bad when they're scraping by mediocre talent by eating punches on the chin and the opponent getting tired. You have to use your eyes a little bit. You can't just look at the betting lines. Hernandez came out, faked the glove touch. I've watched it several times now. It was definitely a fake glove touch because he puts his hand out in front of him and he jogs like he's changing it one foot in front of the other. He's not in his stance bouncing out with his hands long. This always happens in women's MMA. They come out and you go, is she going for the glove touch? Oh no, she's actually going to fight like that with her arms all the way out there. The Greek archer stance, as I saw, I think it was Ishida Kim did something on that years ago in his ninja books. But it was definitely a fake glove touch. Went straight into the Larkin kick, as we're calling it. Or the monsoon kick, because that sounds cooler, straight into the ribs. And it really seemed to throw Dariush. Dariush didn't really get going. The guy moved well, changed stances a lot, changed into, I can't remember, Dariush is southpaw, so he would have been changing into a southpaw stance. Hit him with a straight, and Dariush was moving to counter, but he was so late that he just got sent down by this punch. Hernandez looked tremendous. And Dariush, a lot of his striking has been getting on the front foot, staying on the front foot. He didn't seem very comfortable when he got put on the back foot. And that is something that you see a lot with guys who train with Rafael Cordero. Guys who come from gyms where there's quite heavy sparring quite often and you just learn to get on the front foot. I always say it builds confidence and makes these guys who can just overwhelm people with much better striking pedigrees. We all forget, for some reason people forget that Dariush was running all over Barbosa in their fight until that flying knee happened. He was really taking it to him. But the downside of being so good at getting on the front foot and being aggressive is that you don't really learn how to get off the back foot if you're put on it. So 4-star performance out of Hernandez. That's an example of a 4-star fight, but it was pretty one-sided and short. Dern versus Yoda. Some of you are going to be surprised that I gave this 2.75 stars, but I was quite enjoying it when I was watching it. It had a nice high pace. Dern was trying to get in this girl's face. Yoda was occasionally pulling off some nice counters from the open side and also stepping to the minor angle, shooting the left straight down the centre. Threw a couple of good kicks, but obviously very dangerous to kick with someone who's constantly trying to push you to the fence and take you down. Lots of failed takedowns. Dern got dropped by a right check hook at one point. She finally got the high crotch out in the open, I think, with 1:45 left on the clock, and then got on the back. And it was close stuff. And it was sort of like, where did that come from? Why were you just sort of leaning on her for most of the fight? But, Dern's striking looked like a hot mess. But equally, this is WMMA. The standard is not tremendously high. And aggression will get you a long way. In fact, aggression will get you a long way in men's MMA. Dariush, not the slickest striker in the world, but top 10, and he does a lot of it by just beating people up and staying in their face. So obviously, Mackenzie Dern, not a world beater yet, but certainly you saw her trying to improve herself and round herself out, but you also saw the problems that she's going to have taking people down on the fence if they're competent fighters. Zingano versus Vieira, I gave this 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. This is getting into not really must-watch territory, but better than average fight. Sloppy, powerful exchanges. Lovely takedowns by both. Kat Zingano, I just love watching her take people down. The head pinch that she brought out against Amanda Nunes, just fucking suplexed her by the head twice. and straight into mount, too. The takedown she shot on Vieira in the first round, just gorgeous stuff. You don't see a lot of female wrestlers in MMA moving like that. The counter throw, the throw with the wizard by Vieira was stunning. Seemed to stun Zingano. And she did a lot of just mounting the legs. They were talking about Khabib doing it. And the thing about mounting the legs is that you can get stuck there. The thing that Khabib always does so well is, firstly, he's almost always along the fence, but he manages to keep working the entire time. Even if he has to give up his position and then keep... it's very hard because you get stuck in you've got a decent position. You've mounted the legs, or you've got them in a smash pass, or you're almost in a smash pass, and you're just working that leg down. And you want to keep it. That's the standard way of doing things. That's the jiu-jitsu ethos. But guys like, if you look at Fedor back in the day and Khabib now, they don't mind being pushed out to the feet if they're hitting you while it's happening, and then they'll just keep moving and keep trying to pass. But I thought that was really good. There was a nice guard recovery from mount by Zingano, because she got mounted, and I thought, and that was immediately after the throw, and I thought she was done. But this is why I love watching Kat Zingano fights, because she gets the shit kicked out of her and still comes back and does something cool. She seemed to injure herself on a kick in the third round. Weird that this happened twice in the event. And they got taken down, held on the fence for most of the round, but she hit a beautiful tomahawk sweep, or sickle sweep, some people call it, which is basically the mirror image of the tripod sweep. Tripod sweep, you got the ankle, same side foot on the hip, offside foot behind the opposite knee. If you go sickle sweep, you're going get the ankle, opposite foot on the hip, same side foot sweeping out the back leg, or the other leg, whichever one you want. You don't see them nearly as often as tripod sweeps, but it was gorgeous. So yeah, back and forth stuff, loved it. I used to think that Zingano was a fairly big bantamweight, but this Vieira lassie is enormous, dwarfed her. So yeah, maybe Zingano can go down to 125, because she's so strong. If she could make 125, she could be a nightmare for anyone there. Struve versus Arlovski was dog shit. I've said it once already, but it was dog shit. In fact, I said before the fight, this will be dog shit. If Arlovski doesn't knock someone out or get knocked out in the first round, the fight will be awful, as you know. Nobody threw a jab, because Arlovski doesn't have one, and damned if Struve's going to throw one. Instead, he decided to step in with knees and throw double jumping switch knees, get pushed to the fence and taken down. Not a lot of effort needed by Arlovski to do that. He had 3 takedowns in the UFC before that, and then he got 3 in the first round on Struve. And then Struve kept poking him in the eye, and you're like, that's a lot harder to believe it's unintentional if you've never thrown a jab in your life. I've sort of given up waiting on Struve to turn up. I know that Arlovski's done, but Struve, we've been waiting so long for him to get it together. So one star fight, skip it. You're missing nothing. It's like Mir versus Arlovski. There was nothing happening. Or Arlovski versus Bambini. Or Arlovski versus Sylvia 3. Or Arlovski versus Verdum. Or Arlovski versus... basically any fight that Arlovski went the distance in. O'Malley versus Sukmatath. Really like that. Low kick caused some damage again. God, those are getting nasty. And the guy was trying to pull his leg back. He's trying to withdraw it. I think guys are just going to have to fight from shorter stances to make it less effective. Nice back kicks and spins from O'Malley. A lot of it was... What I liked was that he was doing it to get a response. He'd never really spin if the guy wasn't going to move back. There was... I'll tell you what Sukmatath did well was a skip up right straight. You don't see that often. That's something that Benny the Jet used to like. It's I think he called it a bump or something like that. But it's where it's like an old school point fighting karate technique. Your back foot goes up to your front foot or near your front foot, and then you push off the back foot and move forward. So it's like a bigger step forward. You're bouncing forward almost. Well, not really bouncing. You're bumping, I suppose. But back foot, front foot, and the right hand as the front foot's moving down into position. And he did that. He did that against O'Malley, and because O'Malley was moving back so far each time, he actually caught him on the end of it, which was a pleasant surprise. But that was basically the only moment of success that he had in the first 2 rounds. O'Malley, people drawing comparisons to McGregor. I said, don't let him do any interviews and market him as an Irish fighter. They won't know. But there are some similarities. He pushes the guy onto the fence, works well from there, and is waiting to step back and counter. It's that using the distance as a buffer. Him and McGregor, neither of them is like boxing in boxing range. They're not using their head movement. They're not, they'll do a pull counter or slip one punch and try and counter. But most of it is done with the distance. If you've got that pocket of distance that you can control, you're in a very strong position in MMA, because guys will just run at you and overextend and give you the counter. Lovely pull counter in this fight. He feinted with the shoulder. It was real small, real subtle, but very clearly there if you watch it on the replay. Beautiful. Drew the jab out because the guy had been jabbing with him every time. And that's something that's on O'Malley. When he jabbed, he was open for the counter jab at the same time, the simultaneous counter jab. But he picked up on it, feinted the jab, pulled back, threw the right hand counter. Gorgeous stuff. Dude seemed completely out of it. He was lost looking for his corner. And that's probably played into the last round, which is the one that everyone's on about, because O'Malley knackered his foot on an elbow, throwing these wild high kicks, out of the open, spinning and jumping and stuff. Knackered his ankle, very clearly stumbled and was in agony. And the dude's corner, Sukmatath's corner, were calling for low kicks, and they say, stand up. But if he'd been really quite badly hurt, which I suspect he had, and then suddenly he's on top on the ground, where he'd been trying to get for the first 2 rounds, in his mind, he's like, I've got to work now, I've got to get this done. In terms of fight IQ, very, very low, but obviously been hit very hard at the end of the first round. It's tricky, because anytime we're talking about low fight IQ, we are talking about people who've been hit in the head up to that point in the fight. So, you don't know whether to exempt him because he got hurt really badly, but, we'll work it out. Depends how... I bet there's a more ridiculous performance at some point in our high-level fight before the end of the year. In fact, the way this works with the Slackies is that all the stuff comes in like the last week of December. Ortega versus Edgar is probably the one you want to hear about. I loved that fight. 4 stars. Sad to see Frankie Edgar get knocked out, especially by the ridiculous uppercut I was joking about all week. But focusing on the uppercut is probably not the good thing to do, because it was the elbow that got him, and he was doing really good work up to that point. I said in my pre-fight, Ortega doesn't have a lot of things that he does very polished, but he does have a good jab, so just keep working the jab. And he did. Edgar would come in with a low-high-low flurry or something like that, on a straight line always, because it's Edgar. And you saw him get stiff-armed a few times. He did step offline once, not quite as smooth as Aldo kept doing it, but he did it. And each time Frankie came in with these combinations, he'd then have to get out of range again as Ortega pursued him with like a triple jab. Ortega's shoulder roll, again, not really working. I mean, he can take some stank off it by rolling with the punch, but it's not really the point of the shoulder roll. He's still taking the punches high on the head, up on the side of the head. We're not talking like top of the head, good area. It's not really a good area to take a punch, but if you take a punch across the top of the head while you're in a nice shoulder roll, you're not going to feel it that much, but he's actually getting his head jacked around by dudes punching him. And Edgar did this, each time Ortega threw one jab on its own, Edgar would go left hook to the body, right hand upstairs, and run into it. Frankie Edgar's build at 5'6", and Ortega's build at 5'8", and Cub Swanson's build at 5'7", and Cub Swanson had a couple of inches on Frankie, and Ortega definitely had like a lot more on Frankie than 1 inch, or 2 inches rather. And his reach is built at 1 inch longer too. And I was like, I don't really believe that, because if you look at Ortega's arms on his body, like his hands come down to his knees, and he can punch through an anaconda on an almost upright opponent. Someone said it might do the Chuck Liddell, pull his shoulder blades together when he's getting measured. The Meows do that with their gis. If you ever watch them grapple, or rather in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament, they turn up in children's gis because they just pull their arms, their shoulders all the way back when they're being checked. But I don't know what they do about the legs, though. See, these are the high-level secrets of BJJ, and they've not been shared with me. I need some of that invisible jiu-jitsu. But, I thought Ortega looked good. The thing I said about Ortega is that his fundamentals aren't great. He's not super polished. There's big holes where he gets countered and makes mistakes, but he has that aptitude for this, that gift for violence that I talked about Matt Brown having. He looks for the body shots. He looks for the counter elbows. And if the guy's like covering up, he'll try and check the hands and step in with elbows. He's very good at recognizing targets. And that's something that you don't see in enough fighters, So few guys go to the body well, and he's doing it. Threw a nice body shot and then put his head in front of Edgar as Edgar rushed into a clinch. Doesn't throw a lot of kicks, but I was saying in the week, like, he would benefit so much from being like Luke Rockhold and just kicking as hard as he can whenever he can, because he's so good at getting on the neck as soon as the opponent goes for his leg. And you saw this against Edgar. He threw the first kick he threw, Edgar picked it up because Edgar's great at catching kicks, and he tried to step in on a takedown, and immediately he was having to pull his elbows in and worry about the arm in guillotine or the anaconda. Very cool, very cool. And then he didn't go for a takedown after that. Oh no, I think he went for one, but it wasn't very effective. And then you got Caught coming in. He looked to be doing like his, slip off to the side and come in with the up jab, but he got caught with the elbow on the right side of the head. Beautiful stuff. And Ortega just swarmed on him to finish. Brian Ortega, very exciting fighter. Great, he's a great rival for Max Holloway. I don't understand how he did this all so quietly, coming up through those ranks. It is a shame we don't get to see Frankie Edgar versus Max Holloway. That is a really good matchup. A lot of people have been like, oh, Edgar's done now because he didn't immediately rebound from the massive uppercut after being caught with a perfectly timed elbow. I'm not going to jump in on the, oh, he's done train. And I'm definitely not people were like, well, now that proves Conor McGregor would have beaten him. And you're like, well, Conor McGregor was supposed to fight him like 2 years ago when he was the featherweight champion. And Frankie Edgar's been fighting since, several times, and Conor McGregor has not. So anyone who's just like, well, now that person's lost, they would have lost to Conor McGregor. You're just like, you don't understand how fighting works. The whole thing is that the featherweight and lightweight divisions are ultra competitive. If you sit on the sidelines until people lose, he could sit on the sideline until next year, and or 6 months from now, the entire top 10 could look completely different. But enough about Conor McGregor, because it's been all McGregor this week, and I'm doing the rewrites now, and I'm just like, I'm kind of bored of talking about him. I love watching him fight. Nothing is more enjoyable than watching Conor McGregor fight. He's the epitome of a fun mixed martial artist, and he was a fun boxer. He came in and gave it his best shot, and he got, he worked really hard, like through the rounds. He wasn't ever trying to like get out of there. And he when he says he'll come forward and fight, he does. But it's just so boring waiting on him to coming back, and all this constant. Well, now that guy couldn't have stood up to McGregor because he lost by knockout to a guy he couldn't take down because he's got a wicked guillotine. People are weird. And then Cyborg versus Kunitskaya, not particularly interesting. Don't really like talking about Cyborg's fights when she's not fighting someone interesting. The Holm fight was a good fight. Interesting that Kunitskaya, like Holm, was able to press her against the fence for so long, and with not much resistance or in the way of the counter. Because we give Cyborg so much credit for her strength, but I think, she was strong when she was taking on people who were like 125ers being bumped up, like that Russian lass. God, that was awful, that fight. But I think really she's just powerful, explosive, and she must be strong, but I don't know if she's as magically strong as we all used to think she was, because Holm handled her fairly easily in the clinch. It was on the feet that Holm was having the trouble, on the counter and things like that. Yeah, I mean, another finish for the Cyborg highlight reel, but does anyone care? So 2.75 for that one. And that's our fights. So the ones that I would really insist that you check out, Hernandez versus Dariush, O'Malley versus Sukmatath, and Ortega versus Edgar, all 4-star performances. Oh, and of course, Khalidov versus Narkun. I would give that 4 stars, maybe even 4.25. I'm going to say 4.25 because that was a back and forth barn burner. First round, I did a pre-fight piece for this, which you should check out because a lot of it happened in the fight, and I was like, yeah, because Khalidov's a wild man, and he was going to do weird things. But I said maybe Narkun. He's bigger. He's at the, he's entering his physical. Well, he's in his athletic prime. He's entering his best days. He's the champion in the division above. And he's so good on the ground. This is a guy who he won't be able to make those wild man mistakes against. So the first round, he does draw him forward, counter him with the right hand when he oversteps, knocks him down, immediately gets up, says, I don't want anything to do with this guard. Narkun stands up, immediately knocked down again. And then the first round was just more of bringing him forward and trying to hit him with the right hand. Second round, more of the same, but he did do like he landed a counter jumping spinning back kick. Whoever was asking about that the other week, Khalidov does it a lot. And there was a Narkun through a combination, and Khalidov slipped off to his left side, got pushed to the fence, ran out, and then, without looking back, threw a back kick because he knew that Narkun was running after him. It was hilarious. And Narkun ended up on the floor. Like, he does these crazy things and comes out on top somehow. And in the third round, I put in my article, Khalidov beat something special out of Narkun because he had done very good work in the first 2 rounds, and Narkun had slowed really badly in his fight with Goran Relic when he went 3 rounds before. And Narkun came out, bit down on his mouthpiece, got in the guy's face, didn't respect the power that he'd been showing the entire fight. And something, I didn't see what, but wobbled Khalidov, and he went to the fence, and Narkun worked him over with knees and uppercuts. Khalidov bundled him to the floor, to get out of trouble, rested for a second on Narkun's chest, and the triangle went up, and it was almost an immediate tap. A brilliant fight, a brilliant showing by Khalidov, because he's 37 years old, and he went up and fought the champion in the division above. The best guy outside the UFC as a light heavyweight, I would reckon, or certainly easily one of. And for Narkun, he came out and he fought the best middleweight to never make it to the UFC. A real dangerous guy, and the guy was fighting a really good fight too. So that's my must-watch fight of the weekend. I'm going to give that 4.25 stars. There you go. Real barn burner. Fantastic stuff. Right, let's do some questions. Salutations, Jack. Long-time reader, podcast listener, Patreon boy, and prolific evangelist for finding the art and notorious. Welcome back from vacation. It's good to have your dulcet tones providing the soundtrack to my work days. I've been thinking about takedown techniques, specifically that the right takedown techniques executed on a hard surface like concrete will essentially finish a fight, with the wrong technique on such a surface causing significant grief to the person executing it. With this in mind, what are some good takedown techniques that will maximize the opponent's impact against the floor while ensuring that the person executing the technique will land safely in top position? Cheers. And that's from Renga Sai. P.S. Last time you answered my question on the podcast, you guessed that my name was probably Thai. Good guess, but I'm from the south of India. Our names share a lot of similarities to Thai names due to Buddhist monks from India travelling over to Thailand beginning in the 3rd century BCE. Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you, Renga Sai. I was reading about this on holiday. I was reading about the... what is it called? Shima something rebellion in Amakusa. The Japanese Christians. And basically the Portuguese went over in 1500 and something. And then in 1600 and something you have these guys popping up called Jerome Amakusa and Peter Masuda. Really Christian first name and really Japanese second name. Anyway, high amplitude takedown techniques. The classical hip throw. No, I would... the problem with hip throws and things is that if you end up falling with the guy, if you watch a judo contest, the guys still go over on top of their opponent. And I'm not saying giving up the back, which is obviously one of the things in judo. Guys will hit a perfect ippon throw and the other guy will be on their back at the end of it. I'm talking about if your arm gets trapped under someone as you throw them on top of it on concrete, that's going to fuck up your day. I would say if you watch how Fedor hits his double, or I think he calls it a Marotti Gary, but where it's basically his shoulder and body are high in the opponent's armpit, and he's blocking their leg and just sort of scooping them over. That would be probably my favourite form of takedown if I were dealing with someone on a hard surface. They always say if MMA were fought on concrete, judo would be the best martial art. But I really like that Fedor style double. I think he does call it Marotti Gary, but I believe Marotti Gary is more forward, isn't it? You're reaping both legs with your hands. You're pulling them towards you. But that's a old school, in karate kata and stuff like that. One of the oldest forms, Basai. There's a scoop double leg, but you're taking both the knees and you're pulling them up towards you and standing up. And Basrutan teaches a similar thing. If you catch one leg from a kick or something, you stand up as tall as you can and try and push them back and knock out the standing leg. If you watch Sanshai's dumps, it's get the leg, stand as tall as possible, knock them over, because you want them falling with their legs above them. hopefully catching the back of their head on whatever they're falling on. You know, Sanshi's knocked guys out on the canvas. I mean, if you're fighting someone like street fighting, the classic grip the hands, double underhooks, pull the back in and try and drive them over with the head is, I don't even know what the name of that takedown is. You don't see it very often in high-level MMA because guys don't just stand there and let you pull their back in to you and, suck the hips in and drive them backwards. But Shinya Aoki used to hit like a very similar takedown, and he'd step right over into mount when he did it and immediately grapevine on the far leg. Snapdowns, obviously, are always going to be the most useful thing in the world anytime that knees to the head and socket kicks are allowed. And the other thing about snapping someone down on a pavement is that you can drop your weight as hard as you want. Try and drive their head into the mat when you do the snap down. Not the mat, sorry, the ground. Or drag them along it. One of the things that I always say, like when we're talking about, fighting on a street, I don't like talking about like, here are things that will make you an unstoppable street fighter. But if you are in a fight in the real world, where there is either a pavement or something like that, or you're in a car park or something, outside a pub, probably. But one of the things I always say, like, basic fighting when anything's allowed, a lot of it can be dictated by who can stand up quickest. If you can bump someone onto their hands and knees, or elbows and knees, and stand up before them, you can kick their head in. My great example is Antonio Inoki when he shoots on the Great Antonio. The Great Antonio was a strongman. He was mental. He lived in Canada and he used to he'd go out with a big rope and pull buses off course. He was a ridiculously strong dude, and he went to Japan to pro wrestle, and he was famously difficult. Ricky Dozan, he got into a shoot fight with him in the middle of a match, and then a few years later he got into a shoot fight with with Inoki, because Inoki was famous as an actual catch wrestler, and Inoki would do something and he'd just start bashing him over the back of the head. It was really dangerous stuff. And then Inoki threw a low kick and he's just come on, and doing this weird cat thing. So Inoki shoots in on a single, throws him forward onto his hands, and immediately stands up and starts kicking him in the head while he's on the mat. And if you can do that, if you can get up quicker than the other guy, you are at an enormous advantage. Another great example is Fedor versus Nogueira. I was talking about those really upright scoop double things. But a couple of those, he tries to head kick him right off the actual throw. And there's a really nice one where he goes right hand, weaves under Nogueira's armpit, bundles him over, stands up and immediately kicks Nogueira in the head, just very slightly missing because Nogueira moves back in time. But I always say that is the single greatest combination for fighting in the real world. I think really just the general rule is try not to do anything where part of your body is going to be falling underneath them. Generally, I'd probably say it's better to be in control, sag throwing someone or something like that, or just tripping them, than it is to be hoisting them into the air over your hips or over your shoulder or something like that, where you can fall badly, and you're not on a mat either. So, and sacrifice throws, don't do those. Why would you do that? Maybe a Tomoe Nagi. That's the one that they always show in the old samurai portraits, or paintings rather. Mind you, if someone shot in on you and you could rice bale them with the guillotine, you've got a good chance of scraping their head up on the floor. It's complicated. I would just say stay basic, because you are not going to meet a world-class judoka or wrestler in a street fight, probably, unless you are on the receiving end of an old Dan Henderson or Randy Couture story. So keep it basic and do basic things, and hopefully they won't know what they're doing, or they'll be drunk enough that they're not as good at what they're doing as they used to be. I don't want to get into the territory where I say martial artists don't typically get drunk and go out looking for fights, that Aikido guy on Rogan. Yeah, my martial art doesn't really work, but trained fighters, they don't look for fights. Juliana Pena begs to differ. Also, Badr Hari. I mean, imagine getting into a fight with Badr Hari. That's the single most terrifying thing I can imagine. But whenever we're talking about street and self-defense and anything like that, there is only one move you need to learn, and that is Monkey Steals Peach. So practice that. Forget about everything else. You don't need takedowns if you've got their balls. Right. I reckon that'll do us for today because we're up to an hour now-ish. And it was supposed to be a short recap of the event. But we'll be back later in the week for a preview of whatever's happening next weekend. I'm your boy Jack Slack. If you want to become a Patreon boy, it helps me be able to bring you this stuff twice a week, which what I'm going for now. I mean, I feel spoiled to be able to do that when I am. And if you haven't bought Notorious, consider it, but can also consider holding off because I am writing a whole new section about Floyd Mayweather. Basically, it's like if I wrote a biography of Floyd Mayweather within a biography of Conor McGregor, which is actually secretly a biography of the fight game. And if you've got any questions, send them to fightsgonepodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm up to all the time, I'm on fightprimer.com. I update with every article I do and every podcast I do. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Good to be back to normal, and I'll catch you all later in the week. Cheers!